Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are around the world. I hope you are staying safe. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin, the CEO of FIDIC. You are welcome to this particular webinar session, which is really dealing with change. Today, I'm delighted to welcome quite a number of eminent speakers from around the world. In our usual manner, today is really to update you. So the topic is really dealing with change in uncertain time. For those who've actually participated in the FIDIC webinar before, you know the routine, but for the benefit of those who are new for the first time, I'll be quite happy to just walk you through the session. What we've done so far, we've actually covered over 26 webinars since the COVID started, and we continue to work on that. We've got over 20,000 people that register for our webinar. And I do believe that in excess of 12,000 people have attended the program. And now that more people are back to work, I think it's fair to say that we've got over 19,000 people who's watching the program on YouTube because they are unable to actually attend. But I also know that participants has come from over 150 countries around the world. And I will give you the statistic for today later on. But looking through the 26 plus webinar, I think it's fair to say that we need to share some feedback, which I think is helpful. One is that there is a new normal and working practices will not go back to what it used to be. We understand that economic effect of the COVID-19 will outweigh the last economic meltdown, and we are looking between $1 to $2 trillion pound of impact. Staff and their well-being is critical wherever you are, and people seriously think about their staff and well-being. I do think of my own staff and well-being within FIDIC, and it's important that I remind our industry all along that people is the real asset. And looking after them, making sure that they are, okay, is important. There is an issue about, project and the impact on project and contract. And this is very critical. And one of the conversations we'll be having today is about the impact of this change on projects and what is the implication contractually, commercially, in terms of relationship with third party. But beside that, communication is key. We had to change our business model from relying on members coming to us, but to us, we have to go to members. So communication is key, both internally and externally. This is very critical, and we advocate that for all members and industry around the world. Investment profile in financial decision by government will change because people are now having different way of thinking and in terms of their impact on their society and their well-being and how best they wish they can actually operate successfully in the future. So this is a big issue for most parts of the world. The other point that is coming through, the need for infrastructure will change in the short term and even in the long term and medium term. More and more people were saying there's going to live in the city center. Is that going to be the case? And people are going to look at working in a remote area. So the demand for infrastructure and digital infrastructure will be absolutely critical. The other point that came through, which I think is worth sharing, is that collaboration in working and in partnership. This is going to be the way forward. And this is among stakeholders, supply chain and different client and organization. And more important, no company, big or small, is immune to the impact of the technological change that is happening. Now we are talking to you on this system, and we are reaching out to quite a number of people around the world. And I'll give you the statistic in a bit before I go into that. I know that my team has put the program going forward on. We are doing a series of webinars. One is looking at our committees to make sure that our committees are now external facing. We've had 3 or 4 very successful ones. And the next one is going to be on the 1st of June, 2021. We're looking at our state of the world. We published 2 already. We're looking for the 3rd one this year. And the 3rd one will be 22nd of July. Again, it's on water. And it's looking about the tackling the global water crisis. And again, today we are looking at the impact of COVID. And the next one on this subject will be 8th of June. But before I move on to the next level, can I just share some statistics with you? I am told that we have 1,200 people registered for this particular program, and it's possible that we'll probably get about 40% of that to actually in. According to the level now, I've got about 311 people online within the last 5 minutes that we've actually come on board. But that 1,200 people is coming from 120 countries. I do take it, seriously that, people are actually participating in what FIDIC is doing. And in that 120 country, we've got 96, I think I understand, from United Kingdom. We've got 86 from United States, India, 68, United Arab 60, Philippine 51, and the list goes on. What does this tell me? It tells me that what we are doing in FIDIC is reaching out to over 100 countries around the world. And at this point in time, I know people have suffered a lot of losses, particularly our heart goes to people in India, where the situation to do with COVID is taking a different turn. We can only, pray for a better recovery out there. The vaccination is still very close. Some part of the world have got it, some haven't even got it. And to use my colleague's word, he said, nowhere is safe unless everybody is safe. And this is absolutely important. So moving forward swiftly, on this note, I'm quite keen to introduce you to our president, who has once again, outshine me and continue to support FIDIC 100% during his presidency. So my pleasure, Bill Howard. The floor is yours. Thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, Nelson. And I will be brief. The first thing I'd like to do is thank you, Nelson, and your secretariat staff for putting these webinars together. Under any conditions, it would be a difficult assignment, to say the least. But in the time of a pandemic and working from home and working remotely and all of the family pressures that we all have, et cetera, it's just fantastic how well these webinars have been conducted, how well planned they are, and how well received they are by the participants. And I'd also like to thank the participants. As you mentioned, we have 1,200 folks registered from many countries around the world. That's a very good message for us. And we thank them very much for participating. It also tells us that we're picking the correct subjects that people are certainly concerned about. It's been very important to us to reach out to many of our colleagues and other constituents in the FIDIC world, in the infrastructure world, I should say. And through these webinars that Nelson described, we've reached out to over 20,000 people over the last, I'll say 15 months. We've never been able to do that. And we're very pleased that we've been able to reach out to so many people. And in so doing, I think we've delivered a message to many, many people about the various activities that FIDIC is involved in that go well beyond contracts, although contracts are certainly one of the most important things we do. And finally, I'd like to thank our speakers today. These webinars have been successful because of great planning done by Nelson and the Secretariat staff. But in addition, they've been successful because we've had fantastic, experienced speakers given their time to share with us their views on some very important subjects, of which we have one today. So thank you very much to the speakers. So today's subject is change in uncertain times. All of us would agree that we are very much in uncertain times. And the only thing I'd say that's certain in the future is that there will be change. But we don't know what that change is going to be. We may think we know, and there may be some real hard evidence to indicate, well, this will very likely happen, that may very likely happen. And when I think about that concept, I think way back, when I was a much younger engineer in the 1980s, there were two major things that were going on that always struck me throughout my entire career, and they connect to change. One was the initiation, pretty much the initiation of computer-aided design. And many people at that time were predicting that because of the cost of computer-aided design tools like Intergraph and others, that smaller firms would have a very difficult time competing with larger firms because they perhaps couldn't afford the computer equipment to prepare their designs. And as a matter of fact, what actually happened is just the opposite. Computers got more and more cost effective. As we all know, we could hold in our mobile phones have probably 10 times the capacity that giant computers had back then. So the opposite of what was very predictable happened. And I think it's probably nice to keep that in the back of our mind when we think of certainty. The other one is, at least in the United States back in the 80s, with the implementation of computers, et cetera, we all felt that we were heading towards a paperless society. And over the next 10, 20, 30 years, I found myself, and many of you found yourselves inundated with paper because we could produce paper so much easier. We all had printers almost right beside ourselves. Now that is changing, I think. I think we may finally be entering a phase of, quote, a paperless society. But what's driving it is not the computers. What's driving it is sustainable development and the pressure on all of us to be much more sustainable. So the message I was just trying to relay in there is that all of us need to be careful about change and what is likely to happen, and understand that we should use terms like likely, probably, most likely, that kind of thing, because as we experience the future, it's probably going to be different than what all of us absolutely predicted it to be. So with that, I'm looking forward to hearing from the speakers, and back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Bill. As usual, you've given us some food for thought. Change is here to stay. The only thing that is constant is change. The question for us is every project that goes through change, but the current events have actually made such change more likely and potentially more costly in the future with ongoing social distancing and restriction on the travel movement. The question is, how do FIDIC contract or any other contract adopt a deal with change? Request and what can you expect to occur as a result of unplanned, unscheduled change? In all these things we're looking at, is it absolutely must? That should be in the question for us. If we are to start is, we were at it nearly 18, 15 months ago. And the question is, will COVID-19 still be with us in 6 months time, 1 year time, 2 years, or don't know? This is time for you to get engaged. Can you please vote and just give us an indication about, is COVID going to be here for long, or is it going to be finished in 6 months time? And I suspect if you're in different parts of the world, such as India, you probably said there's no sign of this finishing very quickly. It's going to go on and on forever. And some will probably say, you know something, this may become another thing like flu jab in future. We all have to get it. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to get the feedback from the audience. So Barbara, without further ado, is there any feedback, from the floor on where we are? I think it's fair to say people saying 64% is going to be greater than 2 years. And we've got 16%, which is saying is going to be here or don't know. That's interesting, Barbara, for that feedback. Thanks very much for that. I think it's very important that we put that into context. I asked that question because I want to find out exactly what people's opinions are. And when you read about the mortality around the world, about how many people lost their life, and those who passed away, may their soul rest in peace, and those who lost loved one, condolence to them wherever you are around the world. When you listen to this, you start to ask the question, what's the impact on specific issues? Last year, one of our webinar covers, force majeure. And this year, we thought, well, let's pick that up. 12 months down the line, what's the implication of change on project? So I have 4 great speakers today that is going to give us a kickstart. And just to put things into context, the speakers will be invited individually to introduce themselves and also to say a few words about, the issue about change from their perspective. Then I'll put 2 questions to each of the speaker, one after each other, and then we try and close that bit up to about, 1,300 hours. I know a lot of you are keen to put questions to the speakers. Please be patient. We will open the chat room of about 1,300 hours. That give us 25 minutes, concentrated time to pick question from the floor. Your question will be picked up across to the panelists. The question can be directed to the panelists individual or a general question. Either way, it doesn't matter. I will do the best to make sure we capture that. So without further ado, I used the word earlier on that every project go through change, but the impact of COVID is severe. And what does this mean? So I'm going to start with Jeremy Glover, who is the partner at Fenwick, Elliott. Jeremy, the floor is yours to kindly introduce yourself, your role, and maybe 1 or 2 minutes on the concept of change as how you see it. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nelson, and hello to all of you, and thank you for joining us. As Nelson said, I'm a partner at Fenwick Elliott. I've been a partner for about 20 odd years, and I've spent all that time looking at legal issues on construction projects around the world, whether that's helping projects get started, helping guide projects as they go along, or perhaps dealing with disputes. And when it comes to dealing with change in uncertain times, as a first, and you may say, as I'm a lawyer, entirely unsurprising comment, I think the main basic point to stress is you should deal with change in the same way as you would at any other time. Follow the requirements of your contract. The FIDIC 2017 form has by and large adopted a step-by-step approach. Be aware of at all times and follow your contract, and you shouldn't go wrong. And even if you adopt some of the other strategies that will be discussed this morning, always check over your shoulder to see that your position under your contract is being preserved. But you want to go thinking about the basics. As Nelson's already highlighted this morning, good communication is absolutely key. Keeping the right and appropriate organizations informed about the project, proactive management of the project, especially important in times of uncertainty. Look to see as a starting point, identify what the change is, identify what the changes might be in the future. What's the effect going to be? Are there going to be delays? Are there going to be cost? Think about the way in which change can be instructed. A key problem can be oral requests. I mean, as a bottom line comment, if you're an employer engineer, don't do it. If you're a contractor, always look to confirm that request in writing as a minimum. You want to be looking for transparency. You want to be looking for certainty. And the best way to manage change is dialogue. That way, there are no surprises. The more uncertain the period is, the more you need to be talking to people. Look to see what tools the contract offers you. With FIDIC, there's a great tool. There's the Dispute Adjudication Board. They're there to assist the project. And think about what communication is. It's not just emailing people. It's old-fashioned talking to one another. And I know we can't do that face-to-face at the moment, but WhatsApp, Zoom, Skype, Teams, the world is your oyster. I mean, I think the best advice I was ever given when I was training to qualify as a lawyer was, if there's a problem, talk about it. Pick up the phone. Don't be shy. And that's the best way, particularly when you're dealing with uncertain times. And I think one final thing, if there is a golden rule to dealing with change in uncertain times, it's this: deal with change contemporaneously, address the issues as the project goes along. And it's not just the formal contract bits you need to think about. You need to think about the contracts and the projects in its entirety. What about insurance? Do you need to notify insurers if there are changes? Liability caps, bonds, performance securities. And importantly, it's not just you as a contractor and you as an employer and you as an engineer. It's all about your subcontractors and about your suppliers as well. Think about the bigger picture. And I think, but that's all the type of things you should be doing in any event. So the best way to deal with change in uncertain times is think about how you deal with it in any event.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that very good opening statement. I think that really set the scene. Communication, and deal with it openly. Obviously, there's a lot of being said about COVID-19 and the impact, and the discussion about force majeure. And I was just asking you whether it is civil code or in common law jurisdiction. Have you experienced any change in the laws of a country which directly affected the performance of the contract? And what's your view on the subject at all?
Yes, well, I mean, that's right. I mean, over the last 12 months or so, I think everyone, first of all, they dusted off their contracts. Secondly, they dusted off their university notes to find out what force majeure was all about, because force majeure became a thing. We checked to see what the differences were in the civil codes and common law position, and obviously it all falls back on your contract. But your question has gone beyond that. It's like, what's actually been happening on the projects? Were projects affected? Yes, they were. How were they affected? And were they affected by changes in the law, changes in government regulations? The simple answer to your question is yes. I think every project that I've been aware of, every country where those projects have been, there have been changes in the law which have led to changes in the contract price. And they've all been different. There's been restrictions on movement. That's movement of personnel in and out of the country. That's movement on personnel within the country. People can't actually get into the site. There have been new ways of working. Social distancing, you have to operate projects in a different way. Things take more time. Things are more expensive. Sites get shut down for testing. There's an outbreak of COVID. Sites are shut down because the government says that all construction projects must stop. So there's been a variety of different things and different impacts of changes in the law. And what do you do about that? Well, a good tip is to set out a little chronology of what has happened in your country, what has happened in the region where you're working. When were the first COVID cases? What are the restrictions that have been imposed? That way you've got a checklist, so you can actually see whether, or the extent to which COVID has been impacting upon your project. And you should be doing that whether you're an engineer or a contractor, because you want to be documenting the change, you want to be documenting the effects of the delays, and you should be keeping proper contemporary records. Now, most contracts, FIDIC, NEC, they're looking for parties to keep proper records to evidence the change. So what you need to be doing is keeping an eye on what the changes are, and then you want to be seeing how you can link them to the actual events. It's simple cause and effect. And I mentioned in my introduction the supply chain. You really want to be proactively monitoring your supply chain and the finances of your supply chain too. FIDIC projects, they're globally interconnected supply chains. And I think you actually need to be monitoring your supply chain more now in 2021 than you do in 2020. It's not only that the pandemic, as you've said, Nelson, is hitting different parts of the world rather savagely at the moment than it was last year, but government schemes and protections are coming to an end. So suppliers might actually be more vulnerable than ever than they were before.
So with that, building on that, Jeremy, that's interesting. I mean, a lot of points you raised there are actually something that a lot of people are aware of, and including the issue about health and safety issue. But are there other issues? I mean, now, of course, health and safety, social distancing, these are the things that are causing constraint and will restrict, your ability as a contractor, as a supply chain to deliver. Are there other points that, people need to think about at this point besides just force majeure in terms of making sure projects progresses the way they are planned to do? Because it's easy to hide under force majeure. What about the good practice of how
absolutely. I mean, and arguably you shouldn't just be, well, you should never hide under any clause of the contract. But you want to be thinking about, does force majeure do what I want it to do? Under many contracts, particularly if you're a contractor, force majeure, particularly when you're looking in the impact of the current pandemic, force majeure might entitle you to relief in terms of time. It doesn't give you relief in terms of cost. And your first question, Nelson, talks about increases in the contract price. Now, what you want to be looking at is to see whether your contract has other clauses which might entitle you to recover the cost if there's been a change or an increase in the cost of the contract price. An obvious example is clause 13.7 of the FIDIC form, and that deals with, it's a change of law clause. And it's not just change of law in terms of government statutes. It's why I mentioned in my answer to the first question, you want to be thinking about everything. You want to be thinking about what's happening in your local region. Is there local council changes? Are there regulations that have been introduced by the health service? So there's a wider picture there. So from a contractor point of view, you want to be looking to see what forms of the contract there are that give you a right to recover cost as well. And it all comes down to knowing your contract and being able to keep a proper record of what is going on.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. I'm going to come back to you. I think I'm going to change the direction of travel. I think we've looked at the contract. I'm really going to pick up on Emily now, if you can. And I know I've changed the sequence of events, but I want you to basically introduce yourself as ever and your role within Buro Happold. I know a lot about Buro Happold. I know a lot about you, but it'd be interesting for you to share that with the audience and to give us maybe 1 or 2 minutes view on the subject of the change and what it means for a consulting engineering practice on those things. And I've got 1 or 2 questions to go with that. So Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Emily McDonald, I'm a partner at Buro Happold, and I've got a track record in leading large multidisciplinary engineering teams on projects. But I've got to confess, I am not a FIDIC expert. So I will defer to my very learned colleagues on the panel on the specifics of that. But where I think I can contribute to the discussion is sort of some of the real world, messy, lived experience on projects that we've been dealing with, not just this year, but in the last 20 plus years of my career. My first observation is completely in agreement with Nelson and Jeremy's comment that change is not new and it's not exclusive to the times of pandemic. We manage risk and change all the time, day in, day out. It's what our whole industry is based on, essentially. And I also 100% agree that people, the team, communication and dealing with change at the earliest possible moment is critical to dealing with change well. But I think on reflection of this year and what we've all been living through, potentially what is new is the scale of the change. Having operatives on site reduced from 1,200 to 120, sites just completely shutting, or the program for projects extending by 2 years. I wasn't used to dealing with that day in, day out. That was not normal pre-COVID-19, whereas somehow we are muddling our way through, trying to weave a way into all managing in that now new normal process. That being said, on a more positive note, I would reflect that for the majority of live projects that I've seen during this year, I think it's been incredibly impressive how well the teams have continued to work despite a pretty much overnight transition into a virtual team Zoom environment. And I think that's worth reflecting on as well, that working remotely works, as we're kind of demonstrating here today. So that's just a kind of snapshot of my thoughts on the subject.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think that's actually giving us a different side of the question. And I was going to put a question to you. As a consulting practitioner, you've alluded to the point that, things change, the speed of it has changed. And the issue for me is that, what are the technological implications that's actually, impacting how we made that change? The change is here. We work from home, we do all sorts of things, and technology. So how does that impact you as an organization? Are you ready for it, or do you have to respond very quickly? And what does it mean in terms of the cohesiveness of the team and innovation and creativity?
I think the honest answer was we were partly ready. We were already on a journey towards a more virtual environment. We're a global organization, and so we've got used to working with remote teams, but probably we had been used to doing that, but with a core base of people that all were used to being in the room together. And so we had to very quickly all start working from home. And we've embraced Teams and Zoom. And then the other thing I wanted to flag was Miro, or other virtual whiteboards. So the platforms in which we have learned to have collaborative working have shifted. So we all love the video call, and we all have needed to find different ways of working out how you do the equivalent of being in a room with a big felt tip pen, because you need that creative design buzz to happen in order for the best design to happen. And actually, there are some great tools out there. And so we've all been on a rapid learning curve on that. But actually, I think some of those things will absolutely stay, because, if I'm working with my colleagues in the US or India, or with collaborators around the world, actually having a virtual whiteboard that we can all work on whenever we want to, at whatever time that suits, that's a useful process. So there are definitely some tools that we've embraced that will not get dropped, if you like, even though I would love to be in a room with some people at some point. I think the other flip side is just that the reduced travel, it's led to a better work-life balance in some instances, not always, but in some instances, and also a massive reduction in the carbon footprint of our operations. And in these times when we're still grappling with climate emergency, we have to celebrate anything that demonstrates that we can actually be in new normal, which is moving us closer to a net zero carbon world. So I think those are the two things that I would reflect on.
Well, you've touched on the point that Bill talked about earlier on, and he said, yes, a lot of these things that we come up with a new ways of working, hopefully should help us to achieve that sustainability development goal. Now, people talk about, net zero. Actually, it's a new packaging of achieving what was set out under the Millennium Development Goal. And I think from what I'm hearing from you is the new normal will require continuity of some of the existing technological innovation being taken on board. And are there a specific area that you think is groundbreaking going forward that you think we must hold on to as an industry, as a good practice that we must hold on to? Any particular suggestion from your experience? The whiteboarding one is actually quite a good one. But I was looking at you have global footprint and you have offices around different parts of the world with different time zones. Any particular one that you think industry must hang on to?
I mean, there are all sorts of things that are being experimented with, and I think there will be a continued journey of innovation through that. But actually, I think the practice that is most important that we should hang on to is that we don't all have to get on a plane. And I know that seems very simple, but I think within the built environment industry, where we help, a lot of it is driven by relationships. The need to be in the room together is quite strong, but actually having been forced to not be in the room together, we have learned that it's not always necessary. And therefore, whilst I'm not saying that nobody will get on a plane ever again, I do think there will be a massive reduction in that process. And for example, I've started several new projects during this year, and I have not met a single member of the design team in an actual physical world, because they happen to be new collaborators for me. And I've been astonished at how, even with that, how quickly you can bond as a team, coming and learn how to work together to get the best outcomes of the project. So things are still moving. And obviously, at some point, it would be nice to meet them in person, but it's not essential. And therefore, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of think very critically about, do we really need to get on that plane? Is it really necessary for us all to be flying around the world, when actually we now have proved that we've got these technologies that allow us to work across the globe? So I think that's the one that I most want to hang on to.
Emily, I think you just hit the spot. I mean, when I used to work in Middle East, and I will flag this up, where your client wants you to be physically in the office. And they want to see 80% of the staff working on the job, coming in the morning, but that is not normal anymore. And people need to find a solution. And I think the point you raised about carbon footprint is absolutely valid. Absolutely valid. So I'm going to come back to you later, Emily. I think you got some good ideas to share with people. I'm going to go to Luigi at the moment. Luigi, you are based in Italy, in the heart of it. And I thought, as a partner within DLA Piper, it'd be a good idea if you introduce yourself very quickly and just give us your view within the legal setting, particularly in the area of corporate side. I've seen what does the change means in the particular area of the your business, and how you guys handle it. Just 1 or 2 minutes on that before we kickstart with a few questions. Luigi, floor is yours.
Thanks, Nelson, and thanks for having me here today. I'm Luigi Mula. I'm based in Milan, as Nelson said, and I'm part of the international project team at DLA, dealing with all the aspects of infrastructure. So both on the development side and the transactional side, on the various schemes like EPC, turnkey, DBOM, or PPP. So I'm involved both in the construction and development and the M&A of the infrastructures. But the point here is that how we deal with change in terms of transaction and deals. And I think Jeremy mentioned the importance of discussions and communications between parties. And this is one of the real challenges we are now facing as lawyers, in terms of trying to give resilience and sustainability, not to the project themselves, but to the contracts. as we need to deal with unpredictable events. And if this is already new in the construction sector and in those contracts which link parties for a given number of years and months, as opposed to this, we have some issues in giving flexibilities and resilience and sustainability to M&A deals, where parties need to be clear about commitments, where party needs to have financials and terms and conditions set at a given point in time, and they cannot so easily change them. So the challenge here is that try to see and to look at probably other areas of practice and try to import from those areas of practice flexibilities, clauses, schemes, which can give the parties the opportunity to change their set of arrangements and provisions without just trying to find a way out to the deal. And I think one of the area of practice we can probably see, we can probably try to have some influence is just the construction side, where we have clause such as changing laws. We have the possibility of refer the dispute to an arbitration board without simply litigate or try to repudiate the contracts. So I think what we see in the future, trying to address this need for deal with change, is to import this set of clauses from other sectors of laws, from other area of practice into the M&A deals and M&A area of practice.
Well, thank you very much, Luigi, for that introduction. I mean, I spent some time dealing with Jeremy, looking at the overall contractual side of it, and Emily's talked specifically from consulting practitioner. And you touch on the issue about M&A. Now, I know this sometimes is a subject that some parts of the world said, that's absurd. That is not within consultancy and engineering industry. That's a corporate banking statement and all of that. But you know, and I know that our industries be going through some structural change. And those structural change means companies are buying each other, or they're in the middle of a deal, and that transaction is critical to be closed out in the form of due diligence, before you do the deals, and you look at, all the share purchase and agreement before it comes through. The question for you is, knowing what you've just said about learning from other sector, has that, COVID-19, how does that impact M&A in our sector? Has it slowed it down? Has it, caused a lot of, breach in the conversation of the deal-making process, or has the whole thing, unraveled all sort of disputes in the process? What's your take?
Yeah. Thanks, Anson. I think, yeah, you're right. As normal, COVID-19 affected massively M&A sector. And this is about a number of deals, values of deals, but also contractual arrangements, disputes, and relationship between parties in general. The good news in this context is that a significant number of deals achieved closing smoothly, and even if the COVID-19 impacted on terms and conditions, closing was achieved in any case. And this means that basically many infrastructure projects and asset class were not affected. Look, for example, schools or social infrastructures, or other kind of infrastructure which are not related to traffic demands or travels and so on. So the room for challenging deals is narrower than one can expect at this point in time. And for example, signed deals in 2021 cannot simply be subject to COVID-19 impact. We are all aware of the consequences. We are pretty much aware of the possible impact COVID-19 can have. So parties cannot now negotiate force majeure clause, including the effect of COVID-19, cannot rely on MAC clause anymore at this point in time. I mean, the uncertainty is still here. The change, the uncertainty is here to stay, and parties need to deal with this. But the way to deal with this is different from 1 year from 1 year ago. We see that a number of MAC clauses is being activated in courts or outside courts, but this relates to deals closed or signed in 2020. And the bad news is here for the purchasers is that unfortunately MAC clauses are not so strong enough to justify a repudiation of the contracts. And what we see is that purchasers, given the difficulties from the perspective of activating a MAC clause, they are trying rather to negotiate both a new set of arrangements from a financial point of view or a way out. But there is no clear court case or no clear ruling saying that the purchaser is entitled to repudiate the contract due to a MAC clause or based on a MAC clause. What we can also argue is that probably single jurisdictions and governments are implementing or have implemented new regulations regarding force majeure or hardship regarding the COVID situation. But also, again, this is not just a reason to repudiate contracts, but a leverage to renegotiate financials and commercial terms of the contracts. So basically, purchasers are still bound to their SPAs and to their commitments. But on the other hand, the buyers, sellers need to negotiate and settle regarding the commercial terms due to the COVID situation and to the MAC clause. At this point in time, we have a number of suggestions and advices to give to the purchaser and to the parties in general, but with the overarching strategy in mind that no one can think of get away from their commitments just due to the COVID situation. So situations need to be carefully assessed on case-by-case basis, and contractual arrangements need to be set on a case-by-case basis.
Luigi, I think what you're saying is COVID-19 or no COVID-19, force majeure, buyers beware, because the agreement in your SPA stand, and there is no test case at the moment of any litigation because it's still a very short period. The question I was going to put to you, you're moving on, is for those who are looking to go into the M&A market as part of their growth strategy. Of course, as an advisor, you said, just keep on going there. My comment I've always said is buyers beware, because, most cases, the workload and the pipeline is always, very difficult at this time to judge, as Emily said, because project said, client decided to delay for 2 years. So where's the revenue stream coming through in that particular issue? And how do you package that as a finished product where the revenue is going to come through? So your advice to people who want to go in the M&A market, what will be? Buyers beware, or keep on going without worrying about COVID-19? What's your advice?
From a pure legal standpoint, I don't see any objection or any obstacles for parties or purchasers to go ahead and pursue their M&A deals and opportunities. I cannot judge from the strategic or a commercial point of view, of course, but we have, as I mentioned, we have a set of clauses and possibilities to mitigate risks, to have parties agreeing even on these difficult and uncertain scenarios. And we already have a standard practice, we can say, in terms of dealing with uncertainty in M&A deals. What we see in this day and age is try to shorten the interim period and sign the deal only once we are pretty much there in terms of closing. And we see also simultaneous signing and closing, just to avoid any surprise in a long or short interim period. This is the most common advice we give, and with the most common way to deal we see in the market, but nothing regarding the halt or stopping making deals. And the other major suggestion we can give and we see in the market is try to, as I mentioned, try to set a frame of arrangements rather than a clear cut of commitments, meaning that we can provide formulas, we can provide the calculation methods, we can provide earnouts just to deal with the change in the financials between signing and closings. This, of course, affect the need for the parties to have clarity and clear commitments. But on the other side, it only means we see to give flexibility, resilience to the M&A deals and to keep going with the M&A deals. I think this is the most useful tools we can give, and to try to be closer to the other area of practice, we can also suggest to include in contracts a dialogue phase, a sort of communication phase before going to dispute or litigate the matter.
Thank you very much, Luigi. That's very good of you. I think you've covered more than I thought there. I'm going to bring Husam into the conversation. He's been sitting patiently, listening to all the conversation. Everybody's going to ask, when is Nelson coming to me? For those who don't know, Husam and I have so I have to declare potential conflict of interest. We used to work for a famous company called Happold a long time ago, and he stayed longer than I did. I did 14 years. He told me he did 17 years. So under HKA, and as a partner, Husam, would you introduce yourself, a little bit about what you thought on the subject, and then I've got a couple of questions to put to you. I know a lot of people are busting to put questions to the panelists, so please be patient. We have plenty of time to take questions from the floor. So Husam, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I am Husam Gawish. As Nelson mentioned, I'm a partner at HKA, based in our Qatar office in the Middle East. At HKA, we provide claims and dispute management and expert services to the construction industry. I'm a chartered civil engineer by background, and 10 to 12 years ago, I moved towards the commercial and contractual side of the construction industry, hence my work at HKA. I think I've listened to my colleagues, and I have to say I agree with all they said about change and their views of change. I share the same views. I think one of the most clear things in my mind, as mentioned before, I think particularly by Emily, is change has always been around. It's nothing new. We've always dealt with change in the construction industry. FIDIC and other forms of contract specifically deal with change, but we are dealing obviously with something completely different in the scale of COVID. So my takeaway from the last 18 months regarding change is what I see from experience, a change towards more flexibility and less rigidness, but by all concerned, by all the parties. Flexibility of where we work, where we're based, flexibility as to how we conduct our business, embracing technology, as we mentioned earlier, the way we're holding this webinar at the moment and reaching out to so many people across the world is something I think we never thought was possible not so long ago. And from experience, again, whilst we do have provisions in contracts like FIDIC to deal with change, not everything is catered for, and I think if there's always a tendency for people to misinterpret the contract if they so wish, and which would lead to dispute more often than not. And I think one of the things I'm seeing is people being more willing to embrace dialogue, communication, trying to find common ground. There's a general feeling that we're in it together, which is something I haven't really experienced before. There are, in the past, there are isolated incidents where people feel they are coming from different directions, but I genuinely feel there's a general feeling of we're in this together. How can we find a common solution for the common good of the project? And I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more of this attitude, and I think there's change towards that direction. And I think, Nelson, you mentioned earlier your experience being in the Middle East, which is where I'm based. The need for people to be client-facing all the time has evaporated. We function just as efficiently and as effectively as we did before through virtual means, and there is no hard and fast rule about being there and meeting people. Business still gets done. Emily's example of starting and completing projects without meeting her design team is fascinating. And from my perspective, we are dealing and have dealt with, and I can tell you we're involved currently with arbitrations, very complex arbitrations where the parties haven't met, obviously they've met each other before the pandemic, but during the arbitration process haven't sat together. We have experts from all over the world having not met each other. The tribunal itself is scattered around the world, yet the process is being administered very efficiently, and the hearings are taking place virtually. So I would just sum up by saying one of the biggest aspects of change is changing to accepting that what we thought couldn't be possible is actually possible, and it's really refreshing for me, and I'm sure for most people.
I think what you're saying is that a complete change of mindset and
correct
and philosophy in the way the client, supply chain relationship is coming together. The question I was going to put, actually, I think you've touched on it. If I look specifically on the engineering and construction project, particularly the industrial sector, what are the best practices that's come across now as a result of this COVID that you think, help us to mitigate the impact of it? I mean, we've heard about the issue about the health and safety requirement and all the stuff that comes through that. But looking at the industrial sector, is there any best practice that's come across that you want to share with us based on your experience, Husam?
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting learning process, I think, Nelson, over the past 18 months or so. I mean, the impact, as we discussed, is profound on projects. The supply chain being affected, delays to the manufacture of plant and equipment, staff being unable to travel. One day travel, they have to quarantine. ship materials, go through quarantining procedures at ports, and so on. And that trickles down to the subcontractors as well. So you have that repeated down the supply chain. However, contractors on the whole have become better at mitigating these risks and these impacts. For example, the resequencing of the activities at site, looking at how we can do things differently in a different sequence at different times, has helped a lot. It doesn't remove the problem, but it just mitigates the impact of the delays and the disruption. Simple things like instructing staff or letting staff take leave when they're not able to do their work has helped a lot. Banning non-essential travel, the implementation of all the social distancing procedures at sites, the mandating of wearing masks has helped tremendously. But not just doing it through procedures and through banners and through communication, but I think bringing these into toolbox talks at sites, making sure people are constantly reminded about the importance of these measures and how they help in the long term, taking temperature checks at gates and at site entrances and so on, encouraging staff to work from home where possible, ensuring that we purchase or contractors and suppliers source materials locally as far as possible to try and reduce bringing those from overseas, changing the way shifts are managed at site, reducing number of workers for any given activities, and so on. And I think also these are all short to medium term mitigation of impacts, but in the long term, all these things are not without cost, and people are always anxious about what it means in terms of money and the bottom line. So whilst we may not be able to assess totally what the impact on cost is now, but I would say now, here at this juncture, making sure that maintaining good records by contractors is essential. I think it's been said before, and it will always be said: records. Recording the change, giving timely notices, the updating the program on a regular basis, your site records, your plant and labor returns, keeping separating the impact of COVID. What is COVID impact and what is not COVID impact? It becomes very difficult later on in a year or 2 years to try and separate what's been impacted by COVID and not, and avoiding lumping everything, using, jumping on the COVID bandwagon. Everything has been delayed or everything's costing us more because of COVID. It is not the case, as we all know. And in order to achieve success or a negotiated settlement later on with your employer, you have to be reasonable and you have to be fair in that sense. So I think these are maybe a few examples of how we can mitigate the impact of COVID.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, there's one more question I'm going to put across to you before I go across to the floor. There's a lot of questions coming from the floor, and please be patient with me. I will come to you. I've seen quite a lot of comment coming through that. And just one that I want to put across to you, Husam, is obviously different parts of the world are coming out of this COVID at different time scale. And depending on where you are, obviously, if you cite the case with India, things was getting okay and suddenly it's gone on a dip. If you look at United Kingdom, there were a number of deaths and then suddenly the vaccination is coming through. You look across Europe, they're going through different, and United States, a different issue. Do you think the contract that we use, regardless whether it's FIDIC or not FIDIC, are they flexible enough to allow for that emerging of, coming out of the COVID? Is it flexible enough? Or is it coming back to Jeremy's comment about communicate, and make sure everybody's in dialogue. What does it boil down to, you know?
Yeah, I think the only thing we know for sure about COVID is how unpredictable it's been. And I think, as you correctly say, Nelson, it was the US, the UK, Italy, and parts of Europe last year, whilst places like India and in the Indian subcontinent were largely, yes, they were affected, but not to the extent they are now. We now see where these countries are. There's constant talk of different strains of the virus, and no one really knows what that means in terms of what that looks like in the future, whether the vaccinations will work with these strains. So we are still in very much in uncertain times. We're still dealing with a very unpredictable virus. So are the contracts flexible enough? I think for me, the contracts are robust. They do deal with change. FIDIC certainly is. And we, as mentioned before, and as I mentioned earlier, we've always had provisions in the contract to deal with change and to deal with force majeure and to deal with variations and so on. But I think if there is no will, there is no way, in my opinion. And you can never cover all eventualities. It is extremely difficult to do that. It's difficult to cater for all eventualities. So and as you say, different countries are coming out of this or entering into this at different rates. So it is down to the parties. If you look at the contractors, I think they need to be astute in negotiating the risks that they enter into, depending on where they are in the pandemic, depending on where they are in the world. So negotiating those risks and managing the risks by ensuring that whether time and cost is looked after. But again, pricing the cost might price you out of a job. So it's a give and take process. There may be situations where you need to negotiate the terms of the contract, or having special conditions bolted on to a standard contract to deal with specific issues. But you can't have a multitude of bespoke contracts dealing with everything in one jurisdiction or in one country. It's not practical, and that's why we have standard forms like FIDIC to try and deal with that. So it's a bit of a yes and no answer, Nelson, for me.
I think, Husam, I think you covered the subject very well, in the sense that it's very difficult to develop a contract that will cover all eventuality. Otherwise, it becomes
Correct.
Difficult to move. There's a lot of questions, and we are actually on the hour, which is what I plan to do. So can I just thank you all for your patience, particularly to Jeremy and Emily and also Luigi, who started earlier. I'm going to start picking up questions from the floor now, and some of these questions I'm just guessing as to who is applicable to. But bear in mind that Jeremy started, so I'm going to start off with you. There's a question here which is specific, and you may probably say, no, I don't want to answer it, but please be honest with me. It's actually from somebody called Sushi Babu Dakali. If I haven't pronounced your name very well, please accept my apology. Is that a letter of acceptance was issued under the FIDIC Pink Book. And the FIDIC Pink Book was the Multilateral Development Bank book, okay? And it is required to sign an agreement within 28 days. What will be the solution if the present pandemic environment prevents the international successful unable to come and sign? So you are bidding under the Pink Book, you've won it, you've been informed, and you have to sign within 28 days, but you can't travel because of the lockdown. And where do you stand on that? That's a specific question. Free consultancy advice there. What do you do, Jeremy?
Well, the unhelpful beginning to my answer is it depends, because it depends on the various laws of the jurisdictions of the countries where you are operating under. Some countries have introduced new ways of signing documents so that you can actually sign a document electronically. You can sign a document, have it witnessed if you're doing it. If you're doing it over the screen. So what you need to do is understand the rules of the countries, the laws that you're operating on. See if they have been amended to allow for signature in a different way. If they haven't, look to see if you can agree with the other parties an extension. So that you can actually, so it takes, you look to see, come to look to see if you can agree with the other parties. Because if you're talking about being able to sign the document, everyone wants the project to go forward. So look for a pragmatic alternative way around the decision. I think that's what you should do.
Thank you very much. It sounds like a very pragmatic approach, Find digital means we are doing everything digital. Why shouldn't I say digital signing? Everybody's doing it these days. I've done a several contract and it was perfectly acceptable, including the bank as well, if I may say so. There's another question here, which is, I'll put it out there and see who's the best candidate. It may be Luigi, that be. So do you think that this current pandemic of COVID-19 will have an impact on the crafting of contracts for the construction sector? In other words, I think if I read the question right, it's saying we've never gone through this level of pandemic before. This is just one in a lifetime. At least for me, I hope it's one in a lifetime. Do you think the varieties of contracts available in marketplace, really cater for this once in a lifetime? Or do you think we need to have a step out and step in on the way we crafted the questions and drafted contract? Luigi, what's your take? Can you unmute, please, Luigi?
I think this is a very interesting question, and this is the same approach I mentioned when I mentioned the MAC clauses in terms of drafting M&A contracts in this day and age. Of course, we cannot now try to argue that we are not aware of the effects of the probable impact of COVID-19, and I think as a good faith negotiation principle, there is no particular room for this clause to be included in the new drafting. But we cannot foresee, we cannot predict if additional pandemic or a new or different pandemic will occur in the future. So if I understand correctly the question, we cannot deal now with unpredictability of COVID-19 pandemic effects, but we can deal now with unpredictability of other pandemic, other epidemic effects. This is the clause we can try to address and include in the contract, but not nothing relating to the current situation, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Next question is from Martin Hossenberg. I think I do know which Martin is. This question is directly to Emily, and it said, could you elaborate more on the challenges in holding up the morale of employees and the team members? So Emily, yeah, people are working together, they're working collaborative, they're using whiteboard, and the question is, how do you just hold on the issue about the morale of the employees and keep their well-being together? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I wish I had the magic wand that meant that it was perfect for everyone in this last year. But the things that I have tried and have sometimes worked are sort of regular check-ins, because I think the thing that I've missed most is that chance encounter that you have in an office when you just have a conversation and you check in on the well-being of your team, or at the site, and you have a sense of how things are. You read the mood in the room to a certain way, and that does not work so well over Teams, I don't think. But just actually bothering to have a conversation with everyone on a regular basis, it becomes a bit, I'll just use the word tiresome, because you have to schedule everything in this weird and wonderful world. And that's not quite the same as just having off the cuff conversation. But I think that is really, really important. I also think sort of layers of formal support and education about mental well-being to all the staff. I think that has been really, really critical. And I think also being very honest and open about your own lived experience with either your project team members or your staff or whoever you come into contact with, because as a leader, you sometimes you need to take the role of cheerleader, and you need to just remain relentlessly positive, because you need to keep everyone else positive and focused. But that can require immense emotional effort and a sort of vast amount of input of energy from you. So you don't always feel like that. And I think it's actually quite important to show your own vulnerability, because people shouldn't feel down on themselves if they are struggling or if they're having a bad day, week, month. It doesn't make them a failure. That has been normal life for all of us during this year. And I think sort of recognizing that, being vocal about it, and demanding that we have compassionate and supportive leadership and culture within our sort of both our workplaces and within the wider construction industry, I think is really, really important. You know, we want employees to bring their whole selves to work and to allow themselves to thrive. So I think it's a really, really good question. I think, you know, reflecting on my personal experience for Buro Happold, our amazing staff are the most important asset we have. So I need to nurture and take care of them. And if I'm not looking after that, then we won't have a business. So I really think it's a good question. I think the other reflection is just, both as organizations and individuals, this year has taught me that we need to be both resilient, agile, and innovative. You know, how we approach the challenges of life are the best way to mitigate, not against the risks from happening, but against the impacts from that risks being large. You know, as many people have said on the call, change is going to happen. Whether it's another pandemic or something else, something will come up that we have to deal with. And I think being in the mindset that you are able to respond agilely and collaboratively on that, I think is very important. And I feel lucky that the sort of culture of Buro Happold is one that fosters resilience, agility, innovation. And so I think that has allowed us to weather the COVID storm relatively well. I am not in any way saying we've done it perfectly, but I think that has set us up to succeed, so to speak. And I think we just have to redouble our efforts on that. Does that? I hope that answers the question.
Well, Emily, I couldn't put it any better. I mean, it's a lot of the stuff you talked about, even within FIDIC, we practice it. And yes, somebody have to be cheerleader. Believe it or not. Guess what?
Yep.
One have to be cheerleader. And you know, I have my regular staff meeting once in a week, and we go through everybody. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how junior you are, how senior. Everybody, we ask that same question. I task make sure you reach out, find out, get involved with people, and actually ask the question how they get know. Absolutely fantastic. But it comes back to one point, which is the culture of the company and the culture of the organization and the leadership. So I think, you know, what is being done in Buro Happold, I hope it's an exemplar to other companies, and I'm sure they're doing it. There is
Nelson. Sorry, if I just may add, because this is a very important topic, I think, from my perspective as well. I think we talk about change, and we talked about change at the beginning of this webinar, and I think, you know, COVID has brought a lot of negativity to the world, but I think there are many positive shoots as well. And from my own experience in my own company, this whole move towards emotional and mental well-being support for staff has been really excellent. And it's a shame it took COVID in a way for us to realize how important that was, because even before COVID, now that we're doing this, it's evidently clear to me that it's something that should have been happening anyway, and I don't see it stopping even if COVID goes away. So I think embracing this kind of support to staff is important. It helps a lot. People go through various levels of stress and difficulties in their life, in their work, COVID or no COVID. So I think from that point of view, that's been a very positive change. And also having these meetings you just mentioned with your staff, you know, we were sitting people were sitting in the same office, but not necessarily having these weekly get-togethers, even though they see each other on a daily basis. We're now doing that through web, through technology. But again, I can't see that stopping even after COVID. So really good question.
To be honest, I think this is one of the takeaway for everyone. I mean, the COVID, you may probably see the negative side. I see, like most of the time, the glass always half full. The question is, what can we learn from this and take
Absolutely.
forward? And every speaker has touched on it, that it isn't actually as bad as we think it is. It's not new, and it's not a good thing to lose potentially 1 million people around the world. It's not. Even one single death is not acceptable. But it's interesting that the transformation of what we can learn as a result of the COVID and how we can, I mean, to me, I call it a change agent, is giving us an opportunity to think outside the box, to find a solution that we never thought about, and to actually be creative. And the point I picked up from Emily is actually interesting. It's resilient, agile, innovative. All of that, if you combine that together, it should help you to move forward. And I'm sure that's applicable. But that actually is a good point, and I think we need to pick that up. I'm going to pick up more questions from the floor. And please, panelists, if I'm putting a question to any of you and others wish to contribute, please yell and let me know if you are busting that you want to add on to that comment, as Husam done. So there is a question here, and it's a contractual one, but actually anybody can answer that. And this is a broad question. I look at it from the point of view that we've always said that our business margin is so small, and that, clients sometime when you are packaging project, you raise the issue that you put so much percentage in your contingency. The question is being asked here is from Alzima Amos. He said, is increasing the percentage, for example, the contingency, the liquidated damages, retention, and so on in contract can be one of the modification of the contract to align with the cost implication of pandemic. In other words, are we building enough buffer in our traditional procurement contract to the extent that when we do have these difficulties, as we have in this case pandemic, that we have enough resilience, to use Emily's word, in the process? Because sometimes we tend to listen to the client advisor who says, oh, this project is going to cost $100 million. You need 5% contingency. But you are going to build on a lot of brownfield land, and you don't know what is actually underneath there. Or you're going to have to build a very complex structure, as Happold does all over the world. And some of those structures are going to be iconic one-off that you need to build a prototype, and such as the Millennium Dome, what is happening in Dubai and all parts of the world. I know that company very well. The question is that, are we really advising the client, or is the client resilient enough to think, look, in view of this pandemic, maybe in the future, a means of making sure that we build a infrastructure, be it social, be it economic infrastructure, that is resilient, that has a buffer in the system that can deal that, is about creating sufficient contingency in our pricing structure. I mean, who wants to take that off? Emily, what's your take on the subject? Do you think the client should be increasing more on the contingency to cater for this situation in future, or is it just business as usual?
So I think several layers of response on this one. I think as a designer, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, just want some more contingency. Let's just chuck it in there. That gives me options. We can see here, make my life very, very easy. But you have to be realistic that somebody pays the bottom line for this. And if we went too far, there would be no projects going forward whatsoever. And that wouldn't help me. So I think the reality is that it has to be on a project by project basis. As you point out, Nelson, we work with a complete range of projects at Buro Happold, and some of them are complete cutting edge one-offs. They're never going to come again. You have to treat contingency and risk on those projects in a different way than you do with something that is well understood, well known. I think the other thing to recognize is that you will never eliminate risk. You can mitigate it, you can plan, but there's always going to be a risk. And at the end of the day, there will always be a little kernel of risk that you just have to hold on to and manage. And there's no point in pretending, in the same way that change will happen on every single project, however well planned it is, it will happen. That's the point about the agility, that you just have to set yourselves up to be a collaborative team that, using Jeremy's words, are very pragmatic when change or risk does present itself. So I don't think it will transform overnight how the contracts are set up and how we plan. But would I encourage everyone to think specifically about the details of their projects and therefore really what risk is happening on that project? Yes, I would.
Okay, I'm going to bring Jeremy and maybe Luigi into this. I mean, most of the time you guys are advising the client, either in drafting the contract, and I think it's fair that I elaborate a little bit on this subject. I'm sure Mr. President will allow me to do this, and if you think I'm outside my band, he's going to shoot me down. That's Bill Howard. So my take on this is that I use an analogy where you have a 1 and a 50 and a 250. The 1 is really the cost of the design. and 50 maybe is the cost of building the asset. And then the 250 is the whole life cost of the asset. Most of the time, the client is trying to squeeze that one to 0.75. Okay, and in squeezing that to 0.75, ultimately push the 50 to become 70 because there will be re-engineering and all sorts of things. And then when we start to about the whole life cost of 250, that becomes 300 or 400. In the world about sustainability, where for me as an engineer, I've seen great Victorian structure that's been built in the Victoria time and is still going on and on and on and on. And if you look in today's world, where the client want to pay the minimum or want to give the minimum design for re-engineering, do you think that the client actually taking the medicine that if they want something that will last longer, will achieve sustainability, that they can build contingency to allow that to happen? Jeremy, what's your take on that?
Yes, they can. I mean, obviously, because you want to be positive, you want to be moving things forward. I mean, I think what we're really talking about is when the first question you asked me was force majeure. Well, that's gone away now. What we're dealing with is how do you deal with the known risk? How do you factor in the pandemic moving forward? How is that going to change the contracts? It's not necessarily going to change the contracts radically, and an option is using provisional sums, using contingency to put figures in, because then people have got a broad idea what might be happening. You're going to have, are you going to include COVID as a force majeure event? Employers might like that because it might feel it's fair because it just deals with time. Maybe you can think about contract variation mechanisms. You also want to be thinking about mitigation measures. Something that's ongoing, but it's a thing that sort of contractors, designers had to think about on the hoof as they've gone along. How are we mitigating the effects of delays that's being presented to us, and how it changes on a weekly or monthly basis as government rules change. But think about what if something like this happens next year on my project, and I'm lucky enough to be in a country where the wave has died down. How, as an employer, I'd be hoping that my employers, my engineers and my contractors are thinking proactively about, well, this is what we're going to do if we have to manage this in the future. And that all leads to how do we manage risk? How do we try and minimize the contingencies, whatever? It's early contractor involvement, it's early designer involvement. It's trying to bring all the key parties to the contract together at an early stage as possible, just to sort of review and discuss, when projects begin, when projects being emerging and being thought about, people are going to share ideas. How can we together think about sort of managing the risks moving forward? So involving all the parties as early as possible. That's always a win for an employer.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. There are two questions I'm going to put across before we wrap up. The two questions are very similar. They're specific. And please, if you feel uncomfortable about it, don't go about it. Just tell me you can. This is from Jeffrey Freyers. And he said, what subclause is to be used as a legal basis for consultant to make a supplementary agreement addendum with regards to COVID-19? So, Jeremy, are you in a position? I'm not going to say what subclause. Presumably it's on that white book, is it? Which one is it?
I don't know off the top of my head what subclause you should use. What you should do if you're amending the contract is ensure that you've got a properly drafted addendum that is signed by the parties that who are the parties to the particular contract. So you've got a formal document which amends the contract that you're trying to amend. And so if it might not matter the subclause, make sure you've got a properly signed and formalized addendum agreement.
Excellent. So one question that I'm going to put across to everybody, and I think please have time to reflect on this before I invite Bill to come through, and it's from Tamara, or Tamari, if I've got it right, and say, how do you think that the COVID-19 and the experience of the pandemic will make a long-term impact on FIDIC contract or any other contract in the future for our industry? So I'm going to start. I mean, this is not based on your expertise in FIDIC contract or any contract. Is what lesson have we learned? And how do you think this may impact? I think the word I'm listening to again is flexibility, but I'll let you respond to that. So I'm going to start off with Husam. What do you think, the impact is going to be on the way a contract is drafted in the future? Husam, do you want to make that one sentence answer?
I think I think, I mean, I'm going to have to go with flexibility again, flexibility of interpreting the contract. And I would say the willingness of the parties to find common ground is the most important thing for me.
Thank you. Emily, what's your take? You know, whatever contract you use, doesn't matter where,
Yeah.
what lesson to we learn with structure.
So I think my take is it's not necessarily. I think people will pay more attention to the drafting of clauses in relation to change. I think, you know, and force majeure, you know, if that exists in various different forms. But I actually think the biggest change will be in how people pay attention to those clauses, and I would recommend that everyone pays attention to those clauses. Like, you know, I think what we've had to learn is quite how deep every member of the project team needs to understand the contract that they are operating under, and I think this year has just sort of underlined that. In retrospect, I think not retrospect. I think in the flip side of that is also, I think that we as leaders on projects need to take more care to inform our lawyers of the specifics of the project, so that they are drafting clauses that are appropriate to that project. And I think it's not that has changed under COVID at all, but I just think the urgency and necessity of it has been underlined because of the scale of change that has happened in the last year.
Thank you very much. Luigi, what's your take? Are we going to change, or is business as usual, or what lesson have we learned?
Yeah, I think the key word here is flexibility, even in the drafting of contracts. So as Emily said, we are called to give these flexible and new reliable tools for dealing with change. And as I mentioned, we have a number of means to do that. But probably the basic point is trying to be more transparent. Just taking also advantage from what Jeremy said, we need to share with all the parties the margins. Unfortunately, we need to be very clear about the costs we are taking, we are allocating on ourselves, and so which is basically the bottom line we can afford. So once we have this transparency in place, once we have this set of information shared amongst parties, we cannot hide ourselves behind margins or costs. We need to be clear that we can give up on certain margins. We need to be stick on a certain cost level, and this is the way forward. But to implement this, we also need a precise and clear set of discussion process in the contract, and probably we also could think of adding a new layer of discussions below or above the dispute board, the dispute adjudication board, just to discuss any change and any way forward to deal with these changes.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to invite Jeremy to finish up. You started it. I'm going to ask you to
Okay.
What's your last sentence?
My last sentence is the thing I've learned over the last 14 months. I've slowly started to gain an understanding, because of the different ways in which we're all working, of what collaboration actually means and how you actually collaborate with people. And I think moving forward, that will be one of the other lessons that was learned from this pandemic, is how we work together and we work more collaboratively. And that can only be a good thing.
Thank you very much. On that note, I'm just going to move on across onto this, that we're going to try and go through the last poll. So Barbara, can you just put the last poll in, and I will invite Bill after that. So the question is, following the webinar, do you think that the sector is better able to manage uncertainty after COVID, about the same as managing uncertainty as before, will be worse at managing uncertainty as before? I think in my case, I know which one I'm going to do. So time for you to submit your vote, and we'll see the situation. What is the feedback? So following the webinar, do you think the sector will get better or get worse or the same? So what is the outcome of the vote? Better. I'm glad to know that it is better. I actually voted for better. So that's a reversal, 68%. So we start with about 65% saying this thing is going to go on longer than we thought. We don't know when. And now we're moving on to 68% that the industry has learned some lesson. So on that note, I'm going to sort of go across, we are still doing, Series 3 in 1, the committee webinar, the State of the World report, and more of the webinar for COVID. We've got them on the 1st of June, 22nd of July, and 8th of June. So please have those dates in your diary. The next slide, please. The other point that I want to say is that we are doing our FIDIC Contract Users Conference for North America. The next one is due to start very soon. If you are from North America, so please consider registering for that. And on that note, I am going to bring in Bill to give us one or two words to close out before I summarize.
Well,
Bill?
thank you very much, Nelson. And once again, thank you to our four speakers for an excellent presentation. It was absolutely terrific. Some of the things I got out of it, I'll just quickly summarize. I think Emily mentioned philosophy of resiliency, agility, and innovation as we move forward, as well as the importance of providing emotional support to everyone involved. I think those are tremendous thoughts to bring forward. One of the other themes that I've heard in this webinar and that we've heard in previous ones is there a possibility for, with the way I would put it, of less animosity or win-lose philosophies in dealing with construction claims, et cetera. It's my hope that we've all learned a lot about the different roles of the different folks involved in infrastructure. And if we can ever get to win-win philosophies as opposed to win-lose, that would be a major step forward, I think, for all of us. Managing, and one of the ways to do that is certainly managing risk by assigning it to the right party. Nelson mentioned as well the frustration a lot of our engineering firms have of the cost of engineering services on an infrastructure project are very often 1 or no more than 2% of the life cycle cost of the entire facility, but the influence that engineers have on the whole thing is absolutely incredible. And it is so frustrating to have engineering fees squeezed at that very, very important phase. And I hope sometime there's a lot less of that. So, and the final thing I'd say is, and this came through at some of the questions, is I think there's a misunderstanding of the role of the engineer on projects. And I'd end with this, is just because the engineer is often compensated by the client, that does not mean that the engineer is an advocate for the client. The engineer is required by professional obligation, as well as by the role in the contract, to be fair to all parties. And so that's an understanding that I'd just like to close with. Spent a little more time than I usually do on wrapping up, Nelson, but it's because of the excellent presentations and many of the thought-provoking ideas from our speakers. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bill, for that closing. So, I mean, there's a lot that's been talked about, and I'm not going to try and repeat that because Bill did a very good summary of that. But let me start off by saying massive thank you to our panelists, Jeremy Glover from Fenwick, Elliott, Luigi, Mula from DLA Piper, Husam, Gawish here from HKA, and Emily McDonald. I will have to speak to you, Emily, and speak to Rob McDonald as well. I said I've been talking to Emily today from Buro, Happold. I think he knows you very well. To the four of you, thank you very much for your time and your contribution to this particular conversation. Bill, once again, thank you very much. I know you keep doing this to me. I'm not quite sure who's going to outwit each other. You are much older than me, but your timing is impeccable. Getting up in the morning, early in the United States, to be here and to support us before your grandchildren go to school. Magic stuff. Thank you very much, Bill, for that. I would like to say thank you to my staff as well, who they don't work for me, they work with me. Barbara, Andy, Chanel, and also Nadia, all of them behind the scene, making sure that people get notification for this. And also for those who register, over 1,200 of you that register for this particular program, please, for those who missed the program, you will get the opportunity to get a copy of it on YouTube, and you can watch it on demand when you have the time. So on that note, including Mr. Walker, who is there, I would like to say thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much. Keep safe wherever you are. God bless. Thank you.